What's good? It's Woog. Canelo Alvarez defeated Jaime Munguia via unanimous decision with the scorecards reading 117 to 110, 116, 111, and 115 to 112. And maybe it's just me, but I saw this fight as being a lot more competitive than what I heard the PBC broadcast suggesting. As I was listening to the broadcast and I'm watching this, fight with my family, we're thinking we are watching a competitive fight. Even, through the second half of the fight. I mean, I know that Canelo was doing some excellent counterpunching, and a lot of those punches that were landing were splashing on Jaime Munguia. But round over round, I thought that there were some swing rounds that were just taken for granted and assumed to just go towards Canelo. So I thought that the PBC broadcast was the outlier in how they were viewing the fight. Like if you look at Larry Hazzard's unofficial scorecard, I didn't see what Chris Mannix on the DAZN side of the broadcast. I didn't see his unofficial scorecard, but Larry Hazzard's unofficial scorecard through like 9 or 10 rounds only gave Jaime Munguia like 2 rounds total. And it was 2 of the first 3 rounds of the fight, which I did think Munguia won at least 2 of the first 3 rounds of the fight. But I thought that Larry Hazzard would have been like the outlier. I thought that, when I checked the internet and I see like Brian Campbell of CBS and Morning Combat, when I saw his unofficial scorecard and some of the other, publications and websites, their unofficial scorecards, I thought that those scorecards might more closely reflect how I was seeing the fight. But as the fight ended and then we get to the official scorecards, they read as they read. And I'm just thinking 117 to 110. I saw Brian Campbell on Morning Combat or for CBS and Morning Combat. I saw his unofficial scorecard and it was like 118 to 109 or something like that. Then I checked other sites and it was similar. I'm thinking, whoa, I mean, it must have just been me and us that saw this fight as being a lot more competitive than what the scorecard suggested, except for the 115 to 112, because that suggests 7 rounds to 5 plus the knockdown for Canelo. So I could get with that. But to suggest that Munguia only won 2 or even 3 rounds, I didn't see it like that. I really didn't see it like that. And here's the thing. Even the punch stat numbers that I was seeing after the fight, immediately after the fight, I know that they usually later have like an adjusted CompuBox or punch stat score, but even the punch stats that I was reading, they didn't look accurate to me. I'm sorry. Like I didn't see the part of the fight where Jaime Munguia just totally relented and stopped letting his hands go. Yes, again, I saw Canelo landing arguably the more effective shots. I mean, obviously that 4th round knockdown, that was pretty spectacular. And again, that was after Munguia was really heating up. Like I thought Munguia had a big 3rd round. I thought Munguia won at least one of the first 2 rounds. So heading into the 4th and you see Canelo's, demeanor going back to the corner, I'm like, after three rounds, I'm thinking Canelo knows he's in a fight right now. And maybe his experience ends up coming through and his punching power ends up coming through, his precision and sharpness ends up coming through, which it did. But I was thinking Canelo is in a fight through 3. And then Canelo drops Munguia in the 4th round. So that was huge, right? Beautiful knockdown. And he was just leveling Munguia with some of those uppercuts. But it's not like Munguia turned into a turtle and started moving away from Canelo through the rest of the fight. Munguia kept on coming forward. He kept on letting his hands go, letting combinations go. Yes, Canelo was picking a lot of them off. Yes, a lot of them were missing, but some of those were coming through. And yes, Canelo was returning fire. They were both going to each other's body. That's another thing. I thought Munguia did a really good job going to Canelo's body. So if he would have totally relented and stopped doing what he was doing, yes, his jab started to subside. He wasn't jabbing in the second half of the fight as effectively as he was in the first half of the fight, but he was still throwing a ton of punches. And again, some of those were getting through. I don't see how Canelo runs away with the punch volume, like in terms of punches landed. The punch stats were indicating that not only was Canelo, which we could see landing the seemingly more effective shots, but the punch stats indicated that he was landing more total punches. And that surprised me. That did surprise me. So again, I saw this as being a competitive fight. Not that I would give Munguia the win. Maybe, look, again, I'm not mad at the 115 to 112 scorecard. I thought that 116 to 111, 8 rounds to 4 might have even been a stretch. But that to me is the furthest you could go on the Canelo side. Again, 117 to 110 just didn't seem accurate to me. 118 to 109. I'm thinking like you at that point have to totally be discrediting any work that Jaime Munguia is doing, right? And Munguia was getting hit with the flush shots, but it's not like he got dropped again after that 4th round knockdown. So his chin held. And again, he kept on throwing punches at Canelo. He was going to Canelo's body. They were exchanging body punches. I just saw this as being a way more competitive fight than the official scorecards read, and then the unofficial, most of the unofficial scorecards that I saw, than those scorecards read. So if you saw this as being a lopsided unanimous decision win for Canelo Alvarez, where he did win like 9 or 10 rounds, let me know how you would score that for him so lopsidedly, because I'm thinking that you almost have to make the judgment call that Munguia's punches ain't doing nothing and Canelo's punches are totally shaking up the house. Like, you have to make that assessment and you've got to make that determination. I don't think that that's totally fair to Jaime Munguia. Again, I'm not mad at the Canelo win. I thought he did really well. Look, Canelo's volume obviously didn't decrease throughout the fight. I was surprised at how much endurance and stamina he showed. I was surprised at how he withstood all of the punches that Munguia was throwing. Again, especially because Munguia was going to Canelo's body a lot. I was thinking, okay, you are hitting this older fighter, 33-year-old fighter, to the body a ton, and you're mixing up the combinations, going low and high. Some of those punches are coming through, and Canelo is still able to counterpunch you effectively, at least hang with you, punch volume-wise. So it's not like Canelo's output was noticeably, well, Munguia was throwing more punches. He was landing at a much lower percentage. Canelo was the much more accurate puncher, but Canelo, unlike the Bivol fight, unlike the John Ryder fight, or even the trilogy fight against Triple G, he didn't seem to fade in the later rounds. He seemed to be just as sharp, just as busy, just as defensive pretty much. So I was really impressed with Canelo's performance. But again, I was also very impressed with Jaime Munguia able to keep the punch output going. Yes, his effectiveness per punch might have waned in the later rounds. I mean, he threw a ton of punches, and Canelo did show his experience, and you could see how his punches were impacting Munguia psychologically. I mean, some of those body punches that Canelo was landing were getting Munguia to start backing up in spots. I didn't like how the fight was officiated. The ref, continued to break them up at moments where it seemed like Canelo could use a quick breather. I just saw the ref stepping in, taking like a few moments, especially like in the first half of the fight, to really just do a lot of talking with Munguia, a lot of like checking, they didn't clash heads, but they bumped heads. It wasn't like somebody was throwing a punch and their heads came and smacked, but they did touch heads a few times, and they both acknowledged it like in real time. They both like kind of gave like a little nod, like my bad. And then they would continue, but then the ref would jump in a couple of times and then talk with one or both of them. For a moment, I thought that the ref was about to take a point away from Jaime Munguia. I wasn't exactly sure what he was complaining about, but yeah, I didn't love how this fight was officiated. I was, again, impressed by both fighters' performance. Not mad at the Canelo win. Look, I picked Canelo to win via late stoppage, like rounds 8 through 10 stoppage for Canelo. I thought that at a point, Munguia's super high punch volume and his output would eventually be his undoing. I thought he was going to get caught with something big and then either dropped, maybe stopped, or maybe spooked once he starts getting splashed with the effective punches, to where he starts avoiding Canelo and starts moving around the ring, starts trying to fight a little bit more of a survivalist fight. I thought that that was a possibility, but I thought that it was a bigger possibility that when Munguia gets landed on big that his back against the wall instinct is to then come forward and throw a ton of punches, and then that would be when he gets knocked down and possibly stopped. I thought that that's how the fight was most likely going to play out. But he withstood the punishment. He fought a pretty measured and pretty voluminous fight. So, he kept coming at Canelo. Like throughout the fight, there wasn't that point where he says, whoa, okay, I've had enough. And there wasn't a point where he got beaten to a point where the fight is anywhere near ready to get stopped. Again, I thought that it was pretty competitive throughout, and the scorecards ended up reading how they read. So it is what it is. Canelo won the fight via unanimous decision. He got the knockdown. So this is 5 fights in a row without a stoppage, but Canelo fought well. I'm not walking away from this thinking, oh, maybe Canelo's done. But again, I saw this as like maybe 7 rounds to 5, maybe 8 rounds to 4, maybe even 6 rounds. Call me crazy if you think that this is a crazy take. Maybe even 6 rounds to 6, with the difference being the knockdown. It still results in a Canelo win. So again, I'm not here to say I thought Jaime Munguia won the fight. I just didn't think that the unofficial nor official scorecards, that I'm seeing out there officially and unofficially, reflected the fight that I saw. So they interviewed Canelo after the fight and they asked about David Benavidez. I was kind of confused by the crowd's reaction. I heard loud boos in certain parts of the post-fight interview. I heard loud cheers, or what sounded like loud cheers, in the post-fight in-ring interview when he was asked about David Benavidez. And then he said, I don't know, I'm going to, spend some time with my family. We're going to, take some time. We're going to come back and then assess from there. And then he said, I fought everybody who they wanted me to fight. He keeps on repeating this, including in the build up to the fight. I fought Triple G, Lara, Trout, Floyd Mayweather, Cotto. And by the way, I was thinking nobody was clamoring for a Canelo versus old Cotto fight when that fight was announced. Like, in retrospect, these are a lot of great names that he's got on his resume, and he has fought a lot of good fighters throughout the years. But when he says Billy Joe Saunders, Billy Joe Saunders was a very good opponent. I thought Callum Smith was a very good opponent, but nobody was calling for the Billy Joe Saunders fight per se. You get what I'm saying? You could have impressive names on your resume and impressive opponents, but it wasn't what the public wanted. The public can warm up to the idea and think, okay, maybe this could be a competitive fight, but this wasn't one of the major fights that we wanted to see Canelo in. You know what I mean? And he did that with a few of the names that he was naming, but he said all that to say that he's already paid the cost to be the boss. Now he could do what he wants. And to that, I heard, I thought I heard a lot of boos. Tell me if I'm wrong, but I was a little bit confused. I wasn't sure what to make of the crowd's reaction to Canelo's response to the David Benavidez question. So we're going to see what's next. I have a sneaky suspicion that because the WBA just made Jaime Munguia the mandatory, I think that, and which they didn't do for David Morrell Jr. when he was the lesser WBA 168-pound champ. They didn't do it for him and make him the mandatory, but they decided to make Edgar Berlanga the mandatory. So I actually think that Canelo is probably going to, and they're going to bill it as the Mexican versus Puerto Rican showdown, and they're going to do all the promotion like that. I think it's going to be Edgar Berlanga, and that would suck. That would kind of suck if Berlanga is the September opponent. I know that David Benavidez is going to be fighting Alexander Gvozdyk on that Tank Davis versus Frank Martin undercard, which Tank Davis versus Frank Martin, that's a good fight on paper. But I really don't want Canelo to fight Edgar Berlanga next. But I think that that's how they're going to play this. It might even be Jermall Charlo. We'll see. I don't think it's going to be David Benavidez. And Canelo's answer just kind of kicked the can down the road to where we'll get news in the coming weeks or months on Canelo's next fight. You know what I mean? So stay tuned. And by the way, before the fight, I heard Ariel Helwani, one of the biggest figures in MMA journalism, right? Whose respect I often, I have a lot of respect for Ariel Helwani and the work that he's done throughout the years. But when he was talking, and this is in the somewhere in the early card, and this part was on the DAZN broadcast. Again, I watched the main event on the PBC broadcast, but on the undercard where they were talking, and I think it was him and Sean Porter and Ade Oladipo, I mean, first of all, you could just tell that this was a super pro Canelo event. Like all the commentary damn near was pro Canelo. And that was for both the PBC side and for the DAZN side. Again, I didn't see the DAZN broadcast for the main event, but just in the interviews and the lead ups and even earlier in the card, I mean, I listened to Ariel Helwani and he's saying, well, you know, people are talking about Canelo's ducking David Benavidez. First of all, I think most would agree that that is the case. I don't think that that's a hot take. But Ariel Helwani, in defense of Canelo, was saying, wait a second. And Canelo has said this too. If Canelo fights David Benavidez, the fans are just going to call for the next guy, the next boogeyman that he's ducking, David Morrell or whatever. I'm thinking, no, I think that that insults the boxing public's intelligence here. I think that we all know that Canelo is now getting into becoming an aging fighter, right? 33 with 65 now, 65 pro fights. I think that we all know that, no, if you fight David Benavidez, win, lose, or draw, that's all we wanted to see. We wanted to see how you could do against the other best 168 pounder of the era, of the generation, of the past few years at least. What you could do against that guy. I don't think that we are so unreasonable to where we're going to be like, well, what about David Morrell Jr.? Or years later, what about Diego Pacheco? No, I think that we look at David Benavidez as more or less being the last piece of unfinished business for Canelo. I think that's a lazy take to say, well, you're just going to ask him to fight the next guy and then the next guy. No, I think that we know better. We know that it's David Benavidez and then, okay, you did your thing. I think Jermall Charlo's got to do more to deserve the Canelo fight at this point. Demetrius Andrade, another guy who we had wanted to see, or some of us wanted to see Canelo fight over the years. Demetrius Andrade just lost to David Benavidez. Benavidez, aside from Canelo, is clearly the king of the hill here, right? So just handle that. So yeah, I didn't agree with that take. And I also didn't like look, I often like, the broadcasts of whether it's Joe Goosen and sometimes Abner Mares and Mauro Ronaldo. I thought that this particular PBC broadcast was so pro Canelo. It was almost like they were auditioning for the next Canelo fight. You know what I'm saying? Like they were trying to, through their commentary, stay in good graces with Canelo. That's how I interpreted the one-sided broadcast. But again, I'm hearing, he put on a master class. He schooled Jaime Munguia. So it sounds like a lot of you guys agree that this was a lopsided fight. I didn't see it that way. Again, I'm not mad at the Canelo win, but I thought that it was a pretty close and competitive fight. Let me know your thoughts on this in the comments. Like the video, subscribe to the channel if you are into the fight talk. I'm Woog. Thanks for tuning in.